Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. We're enjoying the fall. I am very sore still from the running race, which you won the challenge because I didn't start the 75K, but you dominated the race. So kudos.
I feel like that was like a veiled, but if I had.
Well, no, I couldn't start. So I think I lost before it began, but
you did great in the 25.
That's right. We had a local, what was this? The North of 89 and 89 put on this race. It was called the Creemore Vertical Challenge. There was 3 laps if you were brave enough to take it on. So 25 kilometers approximately.
27 and a half kilometers
per lap. So I took on the 25, which was fantastic, great distance. I was in quite a bit of pain from the descending of the verticalness, or the vert coming down was where it ruined
the downhill vert,
the cycling frame and body. And then you dominated, and you're still a little sore. So you're taking, I wanted to point this out because a lot of people ask how long do you take off, but you're taking pretty much this week off of running after this.
Yeah, and this is sort of a bit of a combination, end of season / race is over kind of thing. So it's partially like a recover from the race, but it is partially like this is the end of my season, and now we sort of start like a new build phase. So
right. And I always say that I didn't say this, someone else said this, but the idea that if you peak, you want to step off the peak, you don't want to fall off the peak, which maybe describes my running race a little bit as well. As I fell down the mountain.
Second overall.
I did.
Very competitive.
I did.
25K, so you did great.
Yeah. So in any case, that was a fun end. And then, we're taking a little bit of downtime. We went to visit some friends. We had a 40th birthday, which is apt for, not for me, not yet, but for a friend who's just.
I mean, it's literally like days.
It's coming. This is related to today's podcast as well, podcast guest. But we visited some friends, did a couple more bike skill sessions as the weather winds down, fit these in. And then we also had a Durham Shredders youth group. We did a big cyclocross and very quick. We did an hour of power sort of, cyclocross session, lots of skills. So that was very fun last night. So we're back home after a whirlwind trip, but very rich and fulfilling of the cup, but still very sore. The muscles are sore from downhill running.
I'm actually good today. Today was the first day I woke up and I was like, oh, okay. I'm walking fine, my yoga and strength and stuff this morning.
And that's fine. Wednesday from a Saturday race or Sunday? Saturday race. So we are days out there, but I had a few friends. So a few friends did the 10K here on Sunday. We had a 10K road running race. We didn't do this, but friends did it. And then also a few friends who did and clients who did the same vertical challenge. And so we had a few messages and videos of people walking downstairs very tenderly and just like waking up and being like, is it supposed to be like this? And so, yes, that's running.
I'm actually really glad that some people caught it on video, because I think it's like a good reminder to yourself the next time you try to sign up for something that you maybe aren't necessarily fully prepared for. It's not to say you shouldn't do it, just that here's the consequence.
Right.
So I think that is good. Oh yeah. And last week, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see me hold up the book. My new book, The Strong Girl, came out with my company, Strong Girl Publishing.
Congrats. Yeah.
So that's been super exciting. Yeah.
So you can get this on Kindle,
on wherever books are sold.
Obviously in real copy too. Yeah. So, and this is perfect. Anyone who is a big Shred Girls fan, this would be a next logical step as well.
Yeah. And this one's a bit more multi-sport. So if you have a kid who's maybe not as convinced about cycling, but is into just really any kind of movement, this book kind of sneaks in a lot of weightlifting and strength training stuff, but it's very much focused on 1870s circus life. So very, very different from my normal, but I'm really excited about it. So that's been a really fun week with that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think we need to get into today's guest. I think we can talk forever about our race, and maybe we will talk a little bit about the post-race stuff in the next Q&A. But for now, let's talk Phil Cavell here. So
that's right. So Phil is the CEO of Cyclist. This is a UK bike fitting studio. There's actually 2, and we get a tour for the YouTube viewers. We'll try and get that brief tour that Phil gave me at the beginning of our interview, at the beginning of our talk. But he has a great book out.
The Midlife Cyclist,
which
is a very slightly terrifying title.
Well, and it's playing, I guess, on this midlife crisis, but you're a midlife cyclist. And so it's for the 40 plus, but I think the 30s, the 20s, it's relevant, but it goes all the way up, 60s, 70s. And really the main, what do we call this? The ethos of the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that our bodies are not used to it. We're the first generation that's really pushing the limit of what our bodies, what our hearts especially can do.
Specifically as sort of amateur recreational cyclists.
Well, or pro, like there was no time in really the world where, a 70-year-old would be out trying to set like an hour record on their bicycle and just pushing their heart rate to maximal for extended periods of time, let alone in the training to do such an effort.
Sure.
So it's really feels begging the question of like, what does this mean and what are the upsides and the downsides? There's obviously lots of upsides as far as being healthy and moving into older age, but what are the, are there downsides? And that's really the question that he explores throughout this book. And there's a great chapter on bike fitting that if like you want to almost bookmark this, or if it's we did the audio version book, which was just great to listen to Phil's voice coming from the UK. It's always nice that we love accents here. The bike fitting chapter was just amazing. Like if you had a problem, like he talks through a lot of the common ones and common things you could try before going and getting a bike fit. But then there's lots of chapters around cardiovascular health and different elements of health, things like strength training we discuss as well in this interview.
Yeah, and I think we should be able to include a link in the show notes. I think the article went up yesterday. I actually interviewed him separately for an article for Bicycling Magazine about sort of some of these common fit issues. So if you have neck pain, what's sort of the couple things that you would try to do with your bike fit? So if you want like a bit of a taste of it, a sampler, if you will, before you commit to the book, definitely check that article out, and we'll try to include a link to that in the show notes. But without further ado, let's get into this episode with Phil Cavell. Enjoy.
I just finished the final couple chapters on audiobook. So I feel like I've been speaking to you and listening to you, at least I've been listening. I've been talking back.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to have a look around CycleFit? I mean, it's buzzing in here as it always is. There's two CycleFits. There's this one, and then there's one which is 500 meters north of here, which is similar principle, but jeans and trainers. So this one's about performance and injury prevention.
Okay.
And the other one's much more kind of about more casual cyclists. So let's see what's going on. I'm not generally here, Pete. Okay. I'm generally at the other one.
Okay.
But let's have a look around. I mean, we don't know what we're going to see, so I'm just going to take 100%. You out. So
let's see.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Walking through. So this is kind of where we do shoes and footbeds. And that's Jimmy there doing looks like he's doing some shoes and maybe some custom footbeds.
Okay.
And then we also do ticks. We have a podiatrist as well. So this is Jimmy's room, bit of a mess. So yeah, he's obviously midway through a session and he's broken the session. Can you hear me okay, Peter?
Perfect. This is great.
Yeah. So he's obviously broken the session to do some shoes and footbeds. And then in here, Jules is working with somebody. Hi there, guys. Yeah. So you're talking to Peter, yeah.
Yeah. So what is this machine that we're looking at?
So this is a like a fit jig that we use. We have two of these. I think it was originally designed by Ben Sirota. So Jules, I think he's doing a new bike fit here. So he's working off XY data, and he'll be using pressure mapping. He'll be using 4 slow motion cameras. He'll be looking at power curves. I'm just going to alter his screen. He won't mind. He'll forgive me. So he'll also be looking at power and how it's being transferred in the pedal stroke. Oh, no, wrong screen. Where are you, Jules? Yeah. I can't see that one. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So there. So he's looking at power. Are you doing pressure mapping, Jules, as well, or not?
And that's saddle pressure mapping, or pressure mapping on the pedal, or what are you pressure mapping?
Yeah, Jules will show you. I've gate trashed this session, so he can show you. So there you go. So he's looking at pressure mapping as well.
This is the saddle, Phil?
Correct.
Yeah.
So here you can play the scan in real time and see where the pressure points are, but also see how stable somebody is on the saddle. So it's not just looking for saddle choice, it's looking for overall bike fit, stability. And you can change something at the foot and it will change something at the saddle. Mm-hmm. So Jules works with all our pro cyclists and teams. So any pro athlete that comes in, Jules will work with them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then back through here. And then upstairs is a workshop. Let's see who's up there.
This is neat. So you basically you need to have like almost a bike shop within here. Like, is there a functioning bike shop within your fit studio as well, or is this more just for your own purposes?
No, it is. It's a locked door, so it's appointment only.
Okay.
And then back here's the workshop, and there's Barna, the workshop manager, and then Ed's back there as well somewhere.
Okay.
You see Ed?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's a fully functioning workshop here, but it's but it's private to these guys. So, they'll be setting up bikes, or they'll be.
No, is there just normal tunes done there as well, like just getting your bike fixed, or is it always when you're getting your bike fit?
So if we build a bike for somebody, then obviously we'll do their servicing as well. But essentially, everything is subordinate to the bike fit, Peter. Everything starts and finishes, and this is the physio room here, but Nicola's not here at the moment. So everything's subordinate to the bike fit. Everything revolves around fit.
I love that. This is a great intro. We've just recently started doing video, so I'm really excited. That actually was great. So thank you for that. So how did you, I always find, I've done a little bit of fitting in my life, and I found that like, it's difficult because you need to have a bike shop and you need to have a mechanic, and, you want to know these physio questions. So how did you get into it initially? Because you certainly wouldn't have had this beautiful facility or two facilities. You were racing bicycles, and then like, how do you start and progress to this multi-fit studio status you're at now?
So Jules and I were both raced in the same team. We raced everything: road, mountain bike, cyclocross. I'm going back early 90s. And we both got hurt, both got injured. And there wasn't much known about, doctors could kind of fix the injury, but they couldn't really help you beyond what possibly the underlying issue was. So we became very interested in bike fit. We became very interested in anatomy. So we just kept searching around for what the solutions were. We met Ben Sirota, who was also very interested in the subject and was running a school. We went through his school. We met Paul Swift in the US, and then we brought Paul Swift over to the UK. This is going over 20 years ago now, late 90s, early 2000s. Paul came over, we worked on foot control. That wasn't enough, so we then started to develop more of our own system based on people we were meeting. Mick Habgood, our podiatrist, was somebody we met a long time ago, almost 20 years ago, started to work with Mick. He was like a fixed foot specialist podiatrist, so great in the ski industry and transfer into the cycle industry. And so we just kind of gathered these people around us who could help us think through these issues. And the dream was always to bring everyone together in this facility. And over the years, we've managed to do that. It's taken us over 20 years to kind of get the space, get the people, get the tools, design the building internally. This is an old fire station, so we've had to, there's no pole here anymore. So okay. So it's been a long process of just, of constantly evolving the methodology, the technology, brain trust, and we're with the same people pretty much, and then new people join us. And what's great, what's best is how we all work together. So we have a particularly sticky problem, then we'll bring in sometimes there'll be maybe myself and Julian, and then Nicola, our physio, and our podiatrist, and maybe a sports physician. And so you're concentrating all the assets that you need into a focused session. And over that half hour, 45 minutes, someone's going to have ownership of what they think the underlying cause is, hunting the criminal. What's really driving all this? This person's been having this issue for many years maybe, and what really is why do they get this over and over again? They get it gets fixed, and then they get it again. And so we're always looking for that underlying issue, the thing that's driving everything. And sometimes you can't do it on your own. Sometimes you just need to bring in other assets. So we have them here, so Mick, the podiatrist, we run clinics with him all the time, and they're always absolutely jammed because people understand that if you don't get the foot sorted first, everything else really is a problem secondary.
Well, that's interesting. So would you say, like, was the podiatrist one of the first people you added in addition to like your the bike fitter or yourself, I guess, in this case?
Yeah, it was because when we worked with Ben and Paul Swift, who invented the whole wedge system, and we could see that it switched us on to what we didn't know, and what we didn't know was how we fix the foot. We had an idea what we needed to do, but we didn't know how to do it. So meeting Mick, the podiatrist, and there's not many, all podiatrists know about walking and running. They know how to mobilize the foot and utilize the foot in walking and running, but very few podiatrists understand, what the function of the foot in cycling and how it differs to walking and running. There's a guy called Bill Peterson, who is a podorthist. He's unfortunately died, but Bill was also a visionary in this. He wasn't a podiatrist, he was sort of pedorthist. I don't know what the difference is. So Bill was quite a visionary in this as well, understanding the difference between the foot. Sorry.
And I was going to say that some of the issue, I guess, is that like because it's fixed to the pedal at the forefoot, but then the heel isn't involved as much, or at all, versus walking, right? Which is what most pedorthists or podiatrists would deal with. Is that sort of the central issue, or yeah?
So do you ski at all?
For sure, yeah. We're in Canada, so you sort of have to do all these things. Yeah.
So in skiing, you're looking for the similar principle. You're looking to the last thing you need when you're skiing is you need the foot to be fixed in its best position. If it's not fixed in its best position, you can't find the edge because your foot's moving to try and find the edge. By which time it's too late. So with cycling, with walking and running, it's all about facilitating the right kind of movement. In cycling, it's all about locking the foot in and laterally locking the foot in. So you need to actually lock the foot in the shoe, in the pedal. Not with that, I mean, you can have float, but you want to lock the foot in that direction. So there's no movement this way.
I see.
And that's different. Yeah. So, and that's different. That's a different principle.
Now, skiing is very big on like the heat molded insoles. We have a spot here we're in a ski town in just north of Toronto in Canada. And there's at least one, but I'm sure most of the ski shops do this. Now, is your view with cycling that should we be using like a custom insole or like always having, is there any sort of trend there, or is it very much, it depends, on the person and the foot?
I think we do moldable insoles here, which have come from the ski industry, and we have our own kind of blank here that we use. And for some people, they're great, but for some people, what that moldable footbed won't do is it won't correct what's going on at the forefoot in terms of that lateral movement. And those people need a full carbon fiber orthotic, which absolutely stabilizes and locks the foot. So all the pro athletes all the pro cyclists we work with pretty much will have an orthotic in.
Would you say like, is there a situation like, I'm just trying to get like sort of interesting. This is diversion, but this is good.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, it's all cycling stuff. We like to geek out on this. Well, I guess what I'm wondering is like, would someone ever use the stock shoe insole or lack thereof that comes in their shoe, or are you always putting in like one of these aftermarket insoles?
We typically would not use the stock insole. For some people, for some foot types, the stock insole will be fine. So it was called a rectus foot type. So the foot is like a tripod of support. The foot's got really good structure, pretty good arch, and you've got 3 points of contact. You've got the first metatarsal, fifth met, and then you've got on the heel, you've got this tripod of support, and the foot's quite stiff and quite stable. They're probably fine. They might find they're fine with a stock insole. We generally don't stop there, and we'll try and put something into the shoe, but some people are fine with that. And then some people are plagued by foot issues and they just need to have the foot locked in and locked down. And that's the only way to resolve their issues. So we try and bring in the bike fit you were looking at. Well, Jules was doing one and Jimmy was doing something with a foot. I'm assuming he's going to mold a footbed. Everyone's trained to assess the foot and say, okay, I can work with this. No, I can't work with this. And it's that's that decision. And if you don't know, then you bring in Mick and you say, Mick, I'm kind of thinking this person needs an orthotic. And he'll say, no, I think you're fine with it. Or no, he definitely needs or she needs an orthotic. And over the years we worked together, we all kind of know. And so most of the time we can make those decisions, but we're never shy to bring each other in. It's a feature here. Everyone's encouraged. Bring somebody in. Don't struggle on your own. Ask. Even at Jules's level, who's our kind of lead fitter, if you like, even at his level, he'll bring somebody in. He brings me in. He brings Jimmy in. Nicola, the physio, or especially Mick, the podiatrist. So yeah, that's how we work.
Now, we're going to go into a bunch of this fitting stuff, but I want to not get too deep into this here before we mention that you, not just a bike fitting or one of our clients, one of our listeners recommended you and your book, The Midlife Cyclist, which just came out in 2022. They described 21. You 21 as a cycling biomechanics guru and a cycling geek. And so that's how they described you. And they said, we had to have you on the show. So here you are. But this book is not just about bike fitting. It's indeed into like this whole central, I guess the joke of the title, the midlife cyclist, the midlife crisis that we all experience as we get older. And so I'm curious, how does a bike fitting guru go into this whole world of heart health and intensity, and what does it mean, and food and all these? How did you get to this point? Why didn't you write a bike fitting manual?
Yeah. So those are opposite questions. Firstly, the good bike fit guru thing didn't come from me. That comes from your publisher writes the stuff. You don't really get control over this. They kind of, So I would never have described myself as a bike fit guru, and don't. So I don't consider myself to be a bike fit guru. It's just I'm immersed in the world of bike fitting.
And I will say, this was a listener who described you this. It might have been taken from that, but this is a fan. A fan is describing you as their bike fitting guru.
Yeah. Sorry to disabuse him of that. I'm not. I'm not Peter. I mean, I'm not the best bike fitter in this building. Not that it's easy to assess this. I'm probably very good for some clients, and not. So
sure.
I'm not a bike fit guru, and even Jules wouldn't describe himself as a bike fit guru. But he'd turn very pale if you had described him as that, and start to pass out. It's about the fact that we all work together and we're all trying to achieve something unique and for every client that we interface with. And so leading into that second part of that question, and maybe Bloomsbury didn't describe me as a bike fit guru. They did mention bike fit somewhere, but the point being that because of this environment, we're seeing a whole kaleidoscope of clients, from people who are just starting out to people who are, at their peak and professionals and work, and riding for, pro tour teams and, winning Tour de France stages. And then on the other side, they're pros who are on the other side of that journey, and they're getting to the end of their career, and and things are hurting and not working so well. And then also, obviously, we're seeing amateur clients and older guys and women who are getting into the sport and trying to achieve quite extraordinary things. So we're seeing this kaleidoscope of cycling ability, and I'm working with these extraordinary people, and so my perspective, I had a unique opportunity and a unique insight on the one side, what was going wrong for people, and then on the other side, what assets we could collectively bring together to make their journey easier. And the people that I work with all the time in here, I mean, many of them are characters in the book. They come in and out of the book the whole time. And so I didn't just find them, most of them, for the book. They're people that I work with all the time, like, trust, enjoy their company. That's not always true. There's a couple of people that I had to seek out for the book, but mostly the people that keep reoccurring in the book, I've worked with for a long time, and we've influenced each other. So Dr. David Hulse, Dr. Nigel Stevens, Jules, obviously, my co-director here, the physios, the osteopaths. We're all finding our way through this together, and have been for a long time. That was a long answer, sorry.
Well, personally and professionally, because you all are cyclists. You talked about the different doctors who, despite knowing, that some of the heart risk stuff, they still race, and everyone's getting older and pushing the limit. So I guess personally, professionally, but it does seem like the central thing that we're grappling with, which I hadn't, even as a cycling coach too, masters and, adult cyclists, hadn't thought through that, this is really the first era, the first generation of where like a lot of us are pushing into this health and performance, probably more the performance thing into our 50s and 60s. And this is novel, is what you're putting forth.
Yeah. And that's one of the sort of pillars of the book, Peter, really, is that this kind of cognizance that we're crash test dummies here, that we're unwittingly or knowingly entering into this grand experiment. What happens when you try and race tune a body that in most other centuries would be long dead, because we're completely past our evolutionary design life. So that is a grand experiment, and there were outliers, of course, all through the centuries, all through our ancestors' generations, where people would exercise immoderately into middle age and beyond, but not in enough numbers to make it interesting. There are aberrations. It really is the last two generations, and probably just a generation and a half, where there's been a switch. It's just gone, and suddenly 40, 50, 60 doesn't mean sedentary, doesn't mean getting old, doesn't mean all you can eat cruises. It means something else. And that's a cultural switch that's gone, and nobody really knows what the consequences are. I happen to believe they're mostly all good, actually. That's my opinion. But there's not a great evidence base for it. There's an emerging evidence base for it, but it's not a great evidence base. And the book was about trying to,
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. Like you're saying, now there's such a range of people, whether it's not even tied to like, can you do this as a career or are you the best in the world? It's just you enjoy it. You're 50, 60, you have the means and the time to do it perhaps now. And then you're pushing your heart rate, to maximal efforts and pushing the power. And we just don't know, what is the load on the heart. You talk a lot about heart health, but just on all aspects, right? And as you say, most of the stuff's positive, but there's always these little like question marks and probably some individual variants too that are good to explore, and that's what you do in the book so well, I think. I'll try and ask a question about this. Is there, through all this research and looking then at the especially the heart health, seems like that's like the big one. Would you agree? Like that's like the big unknown. There's a lot of these positives, muscle mass, fat mass, metabolism, but it seemed like heart health was the big unknown. Would you agree that that was sort of like the main one in the book?
Yeah, I would, Peter. That chapter is twice the length of every other chapter.
Okay, good.
It was the first, it's the first chapter that I wrote in the book. And in a sense, it was meant to be the book's calling card. And it came as a response to conflicting information that was coming out in the media about exercising to middle age was fantastic for you, and then it was really dangerous for you, and then you should be doing HIIT exercise, and then you should be doing, it's like there was just this kind of morass of information, and it all seemed to contradict each other. It didn't seem to be consistent. And so I kept seeing this stuff, and then I would talk to my peers here, and Nigel, who was kind enough to do a lecture here, and we were all kind of thinking about this. It's like, well, what is the evidence base? So that was the book's calling card in a way. So I went back to the core research and was very fortunate enough to go to meet Ahmed Maghali. He came and lectured here for us. I interviewed Ahmed Maghali extensively, and then Dr. Gemma Parry-Williams, and again interviewed her extensively, talked to her extensively. So I was going back to the key people that did the research into these heart studies, and they were personally involved with the athletes, who are anonymously called the cohort. Well, take the rabbit ears away. These are middle-aged athletes who are, trying to function at a high level. They are a cohort, but they're actually people and personalities, and some of them are my clients. So it really was kind of thinking about that, and what actually did the research show? And does it mean that we should all be very concerned, or was there more subtlety in the data? And where there was any unknowns, let's call it out. Let's give people the information that they needed. Now, I mean, the criticism I've had from the book from some people is that chapter is overwritten, and I'm prepared to wear that criticism. Actually, I think it probably is overstudied and overwritten, but I didn't want to underwrite it either, because excuse the unintended pun, because there's too much of that out there, like a tabloidy kind of 150 words,
Right, that's how you get in trouble, is people die doing cycling, and then it's like, well, I mean, a lot of people live doing cycling too. I think the phrase you use, sort of summarizes it, was like, where is the bodies, right? Like, where are they? Like, we can all probably name someone who's had, arrhythmia or whatever, but we can also name a lot of people who otherwise are very healthy. I'm very fortunate to have a host of 70-year-old gentlemen that I've grown up, riding with, are still doing great, right? And so to me, those are the examples to focus on.
Completely, and I think that's right. I mean, and the where are the bodies thing, I wish that was mine. It's not. It actually comes from the guy that was this heart surgeon for the London Marathon, and he was the kind of lead surgeon. And some of the people I worked with him and knew him, and I think it was a kind of a very dry humor. Whenever he was asked about this, it was like, well, where's the bodies? So if this is dangerous, why are we not seeing piles of middle-aged athletes just, collapsing on the floor? So, just common sense tells you that it's quite subtle. There's something going on. Is it dangerous? For most people, probably not. But it is a very complex thing.
Right.
And sorry.
You use the phrase on the same thread, though, immoderate. And I wanted to ask you, like, why, this could be a Brit versus, Canadian or something, you use the phrase immoderate middle-aged men and immoderate exercise to mean that it's like beyond necessarily like it's not moderate. I think, it's beyond what's maybe required for health. Talk to me a bit about just that word use, because I think there's a piece in there maybe around this topic.
Yeah, that's very perceptive. So our national health system, I don't know what your healthcare system's like. We have what's called the NHS, the National Health System. And the kind of the bland advice that's always given, well-meaning by the NHS and, by these kind of health organizations is moderate exercise, 150 minutes of moderate exercise. Now, what does moderate mean? I mean, it's so bland and vanilla and woolly, it kind of means nothing. So I particularly went against the antonym and said, well, let's throw that out, immoderate exercise. So forget moderate, because no one knows what moderate is anyway. So you default to gentle. Well, let's get rid of gentle and default to, extreme, immoderate, intemperate, if you like, exercise. So it was a play on this whole thing. We're always told every day, 150 minutes of moderate exercise. So I wanted it to kind of just kick that back. So you're quite right. That is a particularly Brit cultural thing, the whole moderate exercise.
Yeah, and I think those 150 minutes and how you describe that on the population, I think that mirrors US and Canada in a lot of ways. Yeah. But I guess what you're saying is like 150, most of us joke, that's like a Saturday ride. Like that's, you're blown through that, and it's maybe even more intense than they intended.
Yeah,
and
I
so
blew through my quota this morning.
Yes. That's awesome. It's a solid Friday.
Thanks.
So I think the other piece then, so there's this training and we sort of talked about the summary. People can read the chapter, I guess, to get more. The other piece I wanted you to just talk a bit towards is this arrhythmias. People get these irregular heartbeats, the fast heartbeats, and those are probably more common in our friend groups that we see. And a lot of times it doesn't really, they do something, they stop drinking coffee or they do something. But is this, in your opinion, like the arrhythmias and stuff, like what did your research show as far as, concern around these different heart abnormalities, if we can call them that?
So first off, yeah, I'm not a cardiologist, I'm a bike fitter. So,
right.
I'm coming at this with a real amateur interest. I'm not a cardiologist. So take everything I say with a pinch of salt. It's probably wrong. Yeah. So first, and the second thing to say is that this is very rare in women. And so the book is called The Midlife Cyclist, and there's a man and woman on the cover, which is what I wanted, and there's only a woman on the side spine. So, and I try and discuss in every chapter how things, if there's any differences, or how this presents with men or women, I talk about it. It's a very boring chapter 3. It's a very boring 20,000 words if you're a woman veteran athlete, because it doesn't seem they have too many problems. Now, it might be because estrogen bestows a protective effect, and you're talking about arrhythmias, and I think you're particularly talking about atrial fibrillation or AF. And it may be that estrogen bestows some kind of protective effect there, because women just don't seem to have the onset of exercise-induced atrial fibrillation that men have. It is one of the more common things, and actually, it's quite, as I understand it, Nigel is an atrial fibrillation specialist. It's easy. It's relatively easy to treat. I won't even pretend to understand, but ablation or chemical or both, or changing the way your daily life and function. So atrial fibrillation is not necessarily something that needs to be scary, but it's interesting how it presents more in women. I think it's 5 times more. I think it's something like 5 times more, or even more, 8 times more in men than women. And one of the confounding variables seems to be alcohol. And I sort of flagged that up in the book and went out on a limb, and I'm just going to put it in there. And I don't remember if I called it, but I might have called it abstinence makes the heart grow stronger or something. But there's definitely a link, it seems. I think this has been proven now, subsequent to the book coming out. I think the research has proven this, that there's a link between quite moderate alcohol intake and veteran athletes, or middle-aged athletes, and atrial fibrillation. So that's not a triangle you want to join, really. And so if you're training really super hard, you're kind of post 40, post 50, post 60, and you drink a lot, there's one of the things you can change really quickly, and with probably having a positive effect, because it seems that alcohol seems to have an effect on the incidence of atrial fibrillation. I don't know why. Maybe it's because there's an inflammatory effect. Who knows? I'm sure people out there listening to your podcast will have the answer now and be screaming at the screaming at the
Sure.
head, yeah. And more is known now, but at the time when I researched the book, it was kind of nudging that way, but the research wasn't definitive. The research seems to be clearer now that there is an issue with alcohol, middle-aged athletes, immoderate exercise, and the incidence of atrial fibrillation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Your one of your final chapters talks a bit towards this, these, I guess, choices, but these other factors, there's the emotional health, there's, I guess, alcohol consumption, there's diet, and sort of these other things that if we are trying to continue to push the performance envelope as we are fighting, some of these age-related factors, these are the controllable things, right? It's not always fun, it's not always easy, but you sort of put these forth as like, if you're trying to push that envelope, these are things, right? Like if you want to keep that heart functioning and healthy as you do these other things, these are controllable factors. I sort of like that because the book sort of starts with this, like, I guess, philosophy of, aging athletes were the first cohort to go through this. And then it finishes with some of these other things, right? Like what can you do about it? What are the other factors?
Yeah. Yeah. And sorry.
Well, I'll try and ask a question.
I was going to jump in there with an answer to a question you didn't ask.
Well, I guess when you're looking at that, then, some of these, the emotional health piece seems to be like something that's coming up a lot more in some of the popular books and even just some of the fitness books, mental training, sports psychology is coming up more. And it does seem like that's especially maybe related to that women piece, the heart attacks and stress. And because that's really what you're talking about, right? Is how much stress can the body take? And if we keep putting stressors, alcohol, life stress, work stress, sleep stress, dietary stress, like I guess that's really what you're looking at in that final chapter. Yeah. For yourself, did you find, like, as you're getting older, like you mentioned a lot of these things, has there one of those been like helpful for you, like one of the more relevant ones for you?
Yeah, no question. And I had a heart health scare, and Nigel was already a friend and a client, and so obviously I went to him, and the National Health over here was saying that I needed a pacemaker, and which is not necessarily scary, but it's certainly sort of disarming, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So I went to Nigel, and he undertook loads of tests, and we talked about it, and he said, well, I think you should make these changes, and he listed them for me. Mm-hmm. And my wife was sitting next to me, so it's kind of like, okay, these changes are going to have to get made. Yeah. And I made them all, and it was an eye opener. And that was before I wrote the book. So I in a sense, I am living it. And I think you actually summed it up really nicely. Stress is stress, whether it's training stress or work stress or relationship stress, or, it's just stress. Your body interprets it the same way in some sense. You've got to think about back to what we were talking about before, evolved function. We didn't evolve to function in this environment. We functioned to evolve in a different environment. Mm-hmm. Where we evolved to deal with stress in a different way. And here in this environment, the environment we're in now, there's a propensity to layer stress, and you must have it with some of your clients who are really super keen to move on and push on with their performance, but they've also got a really stressful job and relationships and all kinds of stuff going on, and they're kind of just layering on like sediment these layers of stress, and not really understanding that the body is having to deal with this stress, with a 250,000-year-old genome, where stress is just stress. And, the number of clients I've got who are climbing on, maybe on a turbo trainer at 11 o'clock at night to get piling that one more sweet spot session. And actually all their body wants to do is they're already sleep deprived. They're already kind of had too many coffees that day, and they've already had 2 glasses of wine, and they've just argued with their spouse. And then, hey, they're going to climb on their bike and do an hour sweet spot or FTP. It's like, and they're intelligent people. If you just kind of said, look, let me just take you off the bike for a second. Let's just have a conversation person to person here. Is this actually what your body's crying out for in this moment, 11 o'clock at night? Mm-hmm. Is it actually what your body wants? And if you had that intelligent conversation, it's not what my body wants. My body wants me to have a milky drink, bit of nutmeg scraped on top, and then 8 hours sleep is what my body wants. So we'll do that then. Why don't you do that then? Do you know what I mean? And that, in a way, that chapter 8, the mindful cyclist, is trying to be that friend that just takes you by the hand and says, this is maybe not the best thing for you to do. And I've needed that, and I need it now. I need it now sometimes. So I understand it. but sometimes we're not our body's best friends in that moment, Peter.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I'm not sure I answered the question you asked, but
No, I think that's good as far as the question was good. But that idea of less can be quite angry. And I find that sometimes with clients, right? Like you suggest, maybe a little less training and a little less this, and, maybe you don't need the coffee and the alcohol, and then just sleep a bit more, and it'll probably be better off in the end. But it's frustrating for, your type A's or your people who like to really push the envelope, right? Which is most of, that's, I think you're probably describing a lot of people who continue to push themselves hard on a bicycle, right? It's sort of, they work hard.
yeah, so let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So if you think about yourself, are you someone that performs best early in the morning or late at night? So let's look at the two polar extremes there. Are you somebody who's your chronotype, if you like? Are you a natural lark, or are you a natural owl in terms of your best performance?
Sure.
It could be intellectually, but let's say athletically.
I'd say morning person for sure. Yeah. We shut down by like 5 o'clock. We don't like going outside or doing anything. Yeah.
Fine. So how many times have you climbed on the bike or the trainer or running machine, whatever, at 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night?
I don't know if I've ever done that.
Fine. So you're working to your chronotype. So you're a coach. So one hopes you have the answer. But how many times have your clients done it? But they don't know what their natural chronotype is.
And it's tough. I struggle, right? Because a lot of this stuff, there's like almost this back and forth pull, right? Where like you want to race, so you need to train at some point. You can't just sleep and go to work, right? But then there's only, the only window of time you have. And so it does really get into that, I guess, philosophical question of, how do you spend your time and what's changeable and what's possible? Seasons of life, I guess you could get into. It's tricky, right? Like some people only have that 7:30 or whatever window for themselves.
Sure. So personally, I was a natural owl.
Oh.
So evening criterion was where I performed best as a racer. I had no idea about these things at the time, by the way, of course.
Sure.
But now, retrospectively, I always did much better in evening races, probably because everybody else was performing like crap. But I would always do great. I would go great in an evening race. So that was my natural chronotype. Now I've had to change my chronotype because of my work-life balance. I have to be up at 5 and at work at 7, and so I've had to change that. So if you're working with your clients, and they're naturally somebody who's is an owl, but their time to check, the time they have available to train is really early in the morning. Well, they've got to adapt to that. They've got to find a way to change so their life actually, so they change their life a bit so they can function at 6 in the morning and do that session. There's no way. So a morning time trial, when I was at my best, I was absolutely rubbish. And all time trials in the UK are early crack of dawn. So I would always be off at 6 o'clock in the morning and perform dreadfully. So, well, no, of course, because I didn't go to bed till 1 in the morning because I'm an owl. So I had my last coffee was at 11 o'clock at night, for God's sake. Yeah. So I didn't know anything then. But thinking these things through with clients now is really interesting, and helping them think about this is really interesting. And the thing is, one of the guys we work with here is a guy called Dr. John Baker. He's not here at the moment, but he's here a lot. And he does all our lactate threshold testing and VO2 testing, and he accessed 10 million kilometers of data for the book for me, and he and I talked a lot, and we concluded that the amateur clients, his amateur clients that he's coaching, are working harder in terms of stress levels on their body at 50 years of old than his 24-year-old professional athletes. So we're working as a high proportion of our maximum heart rate than the professionals. Those guys are being much more cared for, if you like. They're looking after their bodies in a way that some of us old timers aren't. And we wonder why things break.
Yeah, this time limited idea that you should now just like cram more intensity into fewer hours or something. And as you say, ignoring that like the body is older and there's more other stressors as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And of course you get fit overnight. You don't get fit, the stressor that you give the body, the stress dose doesn't build strength and fitness. That's the stressor for your body to do that. And that's done overnight. That's done, and to access that, you need to go into you need to go through the levels of sleep and get to kind of slow wave sleep when the growth hormone is released, but you need to go through those levels. If you've drunk a couple of glasses of wine, you won't get to those levels. So the body won't give you the dividends that you're after.
Here's a question, sort of shifting gears, but one of the things that comes up a lot with aging athletes is this strength training, right? This seems to be trendy. I said this year was going to be even bigger for this idea that like everyone should be strength training, even the cyclist. I'm curious, like for you, what has that meant? And you can be honest, I don't know, cyclists are always resistant, but what have you been able to do for yourself as far as introducing strength training into your life?
Yeah, I'm not the best advocate here, to be honest with you.
You're real though. That's what I was hoping.
Thanks. I do try, and I got some ongoing back problems, so I've got to be really careful with resistance training. For me, that's a bit more difficult. So I try and kind of think outside of the problem. So probably the favorite thing I do other than cycling is paddleboarding, because I'm in extension and cycling's in flexion, so I'm working against that, which is good. I put my dog on the boat. He's a great big golden retriever. He's huge. Stick him on the paddleboard, and we'll go and do a paddleboard session together. And I'm not loading as much as I would if I was doing heavy free weights, but I can't do that with my back. So that's what I can do, and it is an antidote to cycling. I'm an extension, not flexion. I'm my working through my feet into the paddleboard, but I'm also working my upper body. So in that way that I'm trying to use that as an antidote. But what that doesn't do, of course, is paddleboarding. It doesn't offset the sarcopenia in the legs. So sarcopenia, age-related muscle fiber loss. So we'll talk about it in the book quite a lot. It's inescapable. You're going to lose muscle. You're born with a finite number of fibers, and you lose the fibers as you get older. The only way to offset that is to make the ones you've got left bigger. That's all you've got. That's our defense mechanism. So you've got fast twitch, slow twitch, and intermediate twitch. And the ones you want to target here really is the intermediates and the fast, to try and to bulk up. So, and it's possible, but it's hard. But paddleboarding, of course, doesn't help me with that. So really what I should be doing, and this is a bit I don't do, is I should be doing weights on my legs. Again, that presents problems with my back, but I'm being lazy. I could get around that,
Yeah.
So
and I think that's real, right? Like I expected that, not that I know you at all, but like it is the common, like it's a hard thing to introduce later for cyclists, right? You're wired up to like endurance things. You like to move towards the horizon in your activity.
Correct.
So yeah, I love that. And so it is finding those different things. You talk a little bit about hiking and cross training, variable surfaces, which it really resonates with, our beliefs as well. So talk to me a bit about that. You had a couple of tips around like walking and again, just trying to load things, joints, muscles a little bit more.
Yeah. And one of the first people I worked with 25 years ago, maybe more, was an extraordinary physiotherapist who was the clinical director at a kind of sporting physiotherapy practice here in London called Balance at the time. The kind of medical director was a guy called Graham Anderson, a really kind of a very influential physiotherapist here, a lovely guy. Wasn't a cyclist. He is now, but at the time, but he and I met, and he was interested in what we were interested in, and we worked with Graham for many, many years. And every time that he would introduce new physiotherapists into the practice, he would send them straight over to us for training. It's like, okay, you need to go and spend 1 day a week with the guys at CycleFit until even though we weren't cyclists, it was compulsory. You came over to CycleFit and you trained with us 1 day a week. And it was brilliant. It was great for us because we were getting this inflow of, really kind of energetic physiotherapists. And actually that's how we met Mick, the podiatrist. And Mick came over. And so it was just brilliant. And he was absolutely right. It was because he could see cycling was an emerging sport. He didn't really understand it that well. He does now. And Graham, go back to your original question. So Graham's whole thing, he's the Olympic, I think he was the Olympic tennis physio. He's the guy that goes around all the big tennis tournaments, Wimbledon, all that kind of stuff. He's on the tennis tour, or used to be. But, his whole thing is, do what you can do. So if you can't run because you've got bad knees, or then walk chaotically. But cyclists need chaos in their diet. Otherwise, your feet are on these kind of pedals that are going around with these cranks on a bottom bracket. We didn't evolve to do that. That's so unnatural. Mm-hmm. So for him, the whole thing about cyclists is you don't have enough chaos in your diet. You need chaos, and that could be, it could be walking over or hiking over rough ground. It could be anything, but just don't make every single movement you make the mirror image of the last one. That's for him, for cyclists, that's the way of problems. And I think he's absolutely right. So I think I even credited him in the book with it. That it was him that, that influenced me with that. And it stayed with me. And so if I've got a cyclist in rehab, it's like, get some walking poles and head off road and walk off road with your walking poles. And you might, you don't want to become that kind of walking party of old people with your walking poles, but trust me, it won't look or feel like that. Give a cyclist a pair of walking poles, and all they want to do is go as fast and hard as they can. But actually, what they're doing is a great deal of good. Walking with poles properly is 25% harder in terms of cardiovascular input, metabolic input, and it's great for the body. Every step is different. You're involving your upper body. It's great. And so Graham really switched me on to that.
Okay. Yeah, it's big with our cross-country skiers for their like dryland training. So if folks are looking for more extreme examples of like hill bounding and things like this, but they do a lot of just pole walking as well.
Have you done it, Peter?
A lot. Yeah. My coach growing up for cycling actually was a cross-country skier. So we did a lot of cross training. Again, with Canada, like at some point you can't ride a bicycle. So we tried to we tried to avoid indoor training, as much as we could. Obviously you had to do some, but that was the other thing I wanted to hit, sort of related to cross training, variability, muscle, this sort of stuff is you sort of share my view that indoor training you need to be a little cautious with it. So tell me a bit about that. What are the cautions around indoor training?
I'm not against indoor training, and I think it has its use. I mean, certainly with your winters and to a lesser degree our winters, there's times when cycling outside is folly, frankly. You're going to hurt yourself. So I totally get it. But my reservation is athletes, when they're just using it, they're kind of doing 5% on the road and then 95% on a stationary trainer. And the stationary trainer, putting my bike fit hat on for a moment, tends to load the body in a slightly different way. And you tend to interface with it in a slightly different way because it's abstract. So when you're cycling out there in the real world, you've got to interface with this machine and with the terrain and with the environment. Take all that away and you start to work with the bike a slightly different way. And that's fine if you're doing it, a couple of times a week as your high intensity training or whatever. But if that's all you're doing, suddenly when you get out on the road, and you've learned, you might be interfacing with the bike the same way, and it's not good, so, or can be, deleterious. So I think it has its place, indoor training. I do, certainly for kind of the high intensity stuff, but you need to do, in my opinion, you need to do other stuff as well. And sometimes people get problems on the stationary training they don't get when they go out on the bike.
I agree.
Because they're moving. Sorry,
the variability is much lower. Yeah. The one phrase I use a lot, this is actually, it's like really central to my coaching philosophy, but the idea that like the indoor trainer is like a batting cage in baseball. I don't know if that resonates. You probably have similar, but batting cage in baseball, it's not actually the game of baseball, right? There isn't all the, rich elements that go along with the game. And in a similar way, like cycling, it's one element, but it takes away the visual and it takes away the balance, right? And when you think about a kid learning to ride a bike, there's really only the balance and the, where are you going? Like, look where you're going. And so it's really not the thing, right? It's maybe a piece, but it's not the thing. Yeah.
That's right. It's abstract.
I'm curious, like with fitting, this is sort of, again, a diversion, but like related to the indoor trainer, then is there a way indoors like that you can try, and you said it's not quite the same. So do you correct for that in any way, or do you go outside with people, or what's your strategy there? Or is it sort of like you send them away and see how it goes, after they get the fit indoors?
So if I've got a client I'm seeing some issues that I think that, there's some issues on the bike that I'm not comfortable with, the way their technique. Often I'll say, fine, pedal on the stationary trainer, but put flat pedals on. And so, you're really simplifying your pedaling. You're just working extension. You're not working your flexion. Thinking about evolve function, that, your power and extension and the flexion phase is really just to bring the lever system back to where it can. So, sometimes I'll just simplify. And then they can have fun with that. They could go on the turbo trainer or the stationary trainer and say, okay, actually, it feels a lot better than I thought it was going to feel, simplifying their pedal stroke. So we do lots of things like that, even with pro athletes. Sometimes someone's got some kind of, their body's adapted around an injury, didn't get properly rehabbed, and suddenly they're doing something funky with the pedaling, So we just try and reset them by.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, because that's like a simple constraint. You call that again in sort of the coaching terminology. They talk about these ideas of constraints where you could tell me how to pedal. You could describe my foot, pull up now with your hamstring, or you could say, put these flat pedals on your bike and figure it out, and my body will adapt. And it's pretty amazing, what the body will solve for itself. So I love that. That was one of my favorite parts in the book, actually, was just you talking about how the different ways you use that. Someone's got knee pain, or they're new to bicycling or whatever, and just how that was one of the tools in your toolbox.
Yeah, and we often use it diagnostically. We just, someone's got a problem, you don't know what its antecedent is, you don't know where it's coming from, and you just say, okay, so let's put some flat pedals on, put your day shoes or your trainers on, and just pedal, and then often they say, it's all gone, the problem's all gone now. So, okay, so let's just so that's the prescription. Go and do some of this for a while, rather than try and get too advanced and fancy what the diagnosis is, and send you for an MRI scan and go and see Dr. David Hull. So, okay, do you know what? Just do that for a moment. Let's see if that works. Keep it simple, and oftentimes it does.
Yeah. I try and have clients. We have fat biking for snow and stuff here, and it just makes more sense to just wear like your winter boots and not bother with just clipless shoes, or you end up walking most of the time. Honestly, I think it's an excuse to go hiking in the forest. So I try and encourage there, and commuting, and just as much as we can get. Some people have dirt jumpers to go dirt jumping, so you can edge it in that way. Not everyone. Some of the mountain bikers now will split their time between the flat pedals and stuff, but yeah, it strikes me. How do you look at that variability with fitting? If you knew that I, as a fairly competent cyclist, was switching between road, mountain, and flat pedals on my dirt jumper or whatever. Like, does that sound good to you, or do you worry about the mix in position and the variability there?
No, I love it. That's exactly. I think that's perfect. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. The whole idea of with the older athlete, let's kind of fix you in position with a flexed hip and a flexed spine, bent over this kind of machine, and have you just work at 10 hours a week, maximum heart rate in this kind of crooked position.
This one exact perfect position. Yeah,
exactly. Doesn't sound great, does it, when you describe it like that?
Yeah.
So, we try and gently coax people to do something else, or at least think about the position they are adopting on the bike, and so try not to kind of get just bent into that kind of shape. So I think what you say is great. The whole fat bike thing, boots on, that sounds great to me. And the more you get off and walk with the bike, the better, frankly. It sounds great. Upper body, that Graham Anderson chaos thing. It's all going on there, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
I'm envious of that.
In our final moments here, you mentioned, this may not be a great final moments question, but the physiological examination of FTP and its importance with respect to midlife. So FTP is a big one. We've done posts and podcasts around it. Everyone's going to be familiar with it, but what is your feeling around? Do you think we center on that far too much as midlife cyclists?
Yeah, I think we do. I think we made an obsession, and
to put it lightly, yeah.
And it's a strange one, because it doesn't actually correlate that well to any kind of physiological markers. So in a sense, it's too big a bullseye. And what one thinks of one as FTP is, we wear it like this kind of ratchet, and my FTP is this, because I once saw that number. It's like it almost. Are you
familiar with like Gollum and Lord of the Rings, like the single ring, the ring to rule them all?
No.
Well, you don't know. You're not a Lord of the Rings guy?
Sorry.
That's okay. You're probably better off. Anyhow, this like little Gollum character is very obsessed with a ring, and he's like, it's his precious, right? So we've written a few posts in that direction, that FTP is like this precious thing that like you're just irrational about at the loss of, friends, family, other aspects of fitness that might matter, your performance in a bicycle race,
Yeah, exactly. And of course, when I was racing, we didn't have FTP. It wasn't a thing, so all we had was, what we considered to be our sustainable speed. So if you did a time trial, a 10-mile time trial, a 25-mile time trial, and a 50-mile time trial, if you were very well conditioned and it was the right time of the season, those speeds should be very similar. The 10-mile time trial average speed should be the same as 25-mile, which shouldn't be too far adrift from the 50-mile. Now that to me is functional, sustainable power, because you're using it functionally in the real world. I just don't think doing everything you can in your life to see this number appear for 20 minutes once on one day, once in your life, is something you should fixate on it, because it doesn't correlate finely enough to physiological markers. Therefore, it is almost entirely always going to be wrong and become actually just quite a big band. And so I just don't think it's very useful. And I don't think it's very useful psychologically to become the only thing you're aiming for. You know, what we should be looking at is a much broader base of performance around endurance and endurance sport, the ability to endure, because that really does actually key in quite nicely to our evolved function as endurance animals. So, you know, so I think FTP is a strange one. I never had it when I was good enough to look at it. You know, when the number probably was quite respectable, I didn't have it, and now the number is depressing. I'm probably cognitively confirmation bias. I don't need to know it. So, yeah, I think it's a difficult one because with middle-aged athletes either, it's like, you know, there's no fun in watching that number come down. Trust me. And there is going to come a point where it deflects and won't go up anymore. You know, do you agree? Or
I think so. Yeah. I think it's, you know, some people, as you say, there's probably a delicate line there of whether we can handle it psychologically and rationally. And there's probably better ways to go about your training, right? And set those. As you say, lots of people figure, I always use the example of cross-country skiers, like have zero, like they'll maybe have heart rate or, you know, a time up a certain climb or something, but then snow is variable. And they seem to be the fittest people, right? I always just base off of like, they figured it out. They're okay. They cross train most of their year. You know, they have heart rate and somehow they're the fittest people, right? The highest VO2.
absolutely right.
Yeah. And I mean, go ahead.
And if you think about it in terms of, you know, if you've got a choice, you know, this is a really bad analogy, and as a coach, you're probably going to shoot me down, which is fine. But if you can either tune the engine to rev harder, or you can build a bigger tank so that that engine can be fueled for longer, it's like, well, do that one first, and then do that one, you know, so build the big tank first, and then at the end start thinking about, you know, making that, you know, that motor kind of really start to ping. And certainly as a middle-aged athlete, I believe you're much better off building that really big endurance tank first as a safety net, and then start thinking about maybe kind of tweaking the motor a little bit. But it's much easier to do that final tweaking of the motor and making it, you know, perform at its peak if you've built this great big endurance tank, in my opinion.
And I think I agree 100%. Like, I think that metabolic, you know, all the zone 2 stuff is popular now. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's probably what a lot of us enjoy ultimately as well, is that more all day stuff. And then I think if we're doing some of these practices, you speak about the strength training, the cross training. I really like sort of sprint and some of these. I find with a lot of my athletes who have been doing endurance training for a long time, they've never really worked on that under 5 minutes, certainly under 1 minute, you know, just sprint. You know, you've done all these crits in your younger years as there, you know, previously. So you have these skills, but I find that even just the skill of standing and accelerating is missing, which then once we do that, there's actually like a whole world that opens up in the powers and durations beyond, you know, below that, whether that's FTP or that's your all day endurance. Right. So yeah, I think that really makes sense. Yeah.
But all those years of crits, I just hardwired my body into being, you know, just producing that. But a lot of power for a very, it's no use to
like, you mean time trialing, you mean like that sort of stuff, like you just would go out
and it's no use to me anymore, because I'm, you know, I walk the dog and ride my bike and paddleboard and, you know, listen to bird song. It's no use to me anymore.
Right.
So yeah. I think, yeah, exactly.
We've taken up a lot of your time. I have still a whole thing. We haven't got to your chapter 5, which is your specialty, but I think it alone is worth the price of this book, because it goes through, I actually didn't expect it, but it did do what I was, you know, sort of hoping. Was this chapter 5 on bike fitting was sort of, if your neck hurts, here's some things to think about. If your knees hurt, here's some things to think about. And that's sort of the chapter 5 on bike fitting. That's sort of how that's laid out, right?
Yeah. Do you know what about chapter 5? It was the last, no, it was the penultimate. I didn't write it last. I wrote it last but one chapter. Do you know what? That was the hardest chapter for me to write.
Because it's too general. You don't like it?
No, because it's what I know. It's really what I know. It's what I spent, you know, a lot of my working life researching and doing and honing and refining. So to put that all on a chapter of a book was impossible. I mean, that chapter was the most difficult chapter for me to write. I have to say, it's really weird. So I'm pleased that you enjoyed it, but honestly, it was very difficult for me to write that chapter, considering it's what I know. And I didn't have to pick up a reference book at any point there. You know, that could come out my head, and even then, I found it hard to write. So bizarre.
Well, and I was going to do with this interview, I was like, we'll go through like, okay, I have neck pain. What would you look at? But then I was like, I mean, it's in chapter 5. Folks can get the audio book and listen to you go through all these things. And then if they can't solve it with these general things, they can come and see yourself or someone like you.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned you're working. What is this book too? I want to finish up here. Just, we'll put all the links for the book, folks, to check out CycleFit if you are near or can visit the UK. But what's this book too that you're working on?
Yeah, so it's kind of take chapter 8, the mindful cyclist, and go down that rabbit hole. Like what else can we do, and really to understand ourselves, what's preventing us from doing the things that we know to be right. If I tell you that you don't need to ride your bike tonight, it's 11 o'clock, you've had too much coffee, you're stressed at work, but the fact then you get on the bike and do it anyway, even if I told you not to, what is that? What's going on there? So it's much more thinking about what blocks we might have for doing. So that it's more about that. What is it that, neurologically, what's going on that puts us on the bike and then won't get us off when we should? Or it's staying in lane in terms of seeking and optimizing performance as a balance to life, but taking much more of a direction from chapter 8, which is the mindful cyclist, and thinking about what's going on, trying to understand ourselves as people, and then how that relates to our exercise in a healthy way, and sometimes not a healthy way. And I've had both personally. So I'm going to be full disclosure here and lay it out there for myself and for other people. And I'm interviewing a lot of ex-pro athletes, ex-pro cyclists who are household names, but also people no one's ever heard of, and a couple of people who you should have heard of, but you didn't for one reason or another, because their life went that way and it could have gone that way. And so it's not looking at myself, but other people as examples, and trying to understand what makes us function like we do in a good way, and sometimes not such a good way. So that's the next book I'm wrestling with, and it's really fun. It's really fun to think about.
I love it. Yeah. And just even all these, because you said there's all these good practices, and yourself or the cardiologists in the book say, like, I know it's not the healthiest thing, but I still do it. And you say strength train, but I can tell you most cyclists, I bet on that we're going to be not necessarily doing it. Replacing sessions, you don't have to bike 5 times a week. You can do 4 and then do a cross train. We don't want to do that. We're just going to ride our bike. Yeah. There's a whole world without even getting into behavior change and sleep and nutrition. There's a lot there.
And then what made you take up cycling? I mean, I took up cycling because I wasn't good at anything else. I mean, in fact, I wasn't good at anything, and I was one of those kids at school. I was never really, my best friend at the school was best sportsman in the school, best sportsman in the county, could do anything. I couldn't do anything. But put me on a bike and somehow it all kind of worked, and this sort of self-selecting cohort of people, it's not the same, it's not like that anymore, but it is a bit like that, like we fall out the shaker, and it's like, oh, these guys are going to be cyclists, and why is that, and really looking at that, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, as you say, the different clients that you have come through, there's, even just you saying that this was the thing I was good at, and then it's, I think you call them Peter Pan. Like, you can see why we all, I'm no different, we end up with this, like, well, I would like to preserve this thing that I'm good at as long as I can. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So it's interesting, and I'm taking it from that kind of that first, why get on a bike? I'm using a couple of household names, just because I know them, and why do they get on a bike? And it's really shocking when you talk to them. You really talk to them, they really open up. It's like why they actually ever got on a bike, and what it felt like when they did, what they got from it, and how it changed the way they completely lived in the world, and the confidence it gave them, and it's like it's shocking. It's amazing, And then why would you not want to share that with everybody else who's kind of struggling with stuff?
Yeah,
well, I mean, yeah, I do.
It's beautiful. I appreciate your time so much today, Phil. And again, that's the Midlife Cyclist. I've enjoyed it on Audible, but it's available wherever you get books as well, if you want to read it. Anything else that I've forgotten here?
Loads.
Well,
I'm old, I can't remember, but almost certainly.
Well, folks will have to catch up, get the book read, and then your book 2 will cover all the things that I've forgotten, I'm sure.
Yeah, nice to talk to you, Peter.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.